So I think I'm going to go ahead and get started just to honor your time and be respectful and of our panelists. Thank everyone for joining us. This is the MPA information session with a social policy focus for fall 2023. My name is Dr. Jacqueline Miller. I am the Director of Admissions here at the Evans School of Public Policy and Governance at the University of Washington. I am joined by my colleague, Dr. Scott Allard, Associate Dean for Research and Engagement and Professor of Social Policy. Thank you for taking the time, Professor Allard, to discuss social policy with us.
It's great to be here. Thanks, Dr. Miller.
I like to start each session with our land acknowledgement, so that the University of Washington acknowledges the Coast people of this land, the land which touches the shared waters of all tribes and bands within the Suquamish, Tulalip, and Muckleshoot nations. The Evans School acknowledges that we are on the traditional land of the first people of Seattle, the Duwamish people, past and present, and honor with gratitude the land itself and the Duwamish tribe. Today's agenda will be an introduction to the Evans School, an overview of the Evans School MPA curriculum, the overview of the MPA specialization, and then I will turn the time over to Professor Allard to join us with the social policy panel, followed by Q&A and upcoming events. So this year, the Evans School has been ranked number 3 in the nation by U.S. News and World Report for our public policy and public administration program. The history of public policy and public administration graduate programs can be traced back for over 100 years. The thinking behind its creation was that if we can create and develop graduate degree programs in business administration that focus on leadership and management, we can create graduate programs that focus on leadership, management, systems, tools, and processes that can be used by practitioners in government. So you see, public policies are developed and implemented through a complex set of processes that seek to balance competing stakeholder interests. This year, the Evans School celebrates its 60th anniversary. 60 years of impact, finding solutions to real-world challenges, 60 years of shaping leaders in government and nonprofit organizations, 60 years of envisioning inclusively built societies powered by collective wisdom, brave leadership, and rigorous action. The principles that guide the work of the Evans School are equity, courage, and service. We are committed to discovering and daylighting disparities, taking anti-racist action, and dismantling systems of oppression. Courage. We stand for policies and practices, leadership informed by evidence and empathy, data and compassion, head and heart. Service. We have a responsibility to think beyond ourselves and act to build up all. We are definitely leaning into our responsibility to strengthen the systems that reinforce our democracy. This is an example of a program of study for an Evans MPA full-time student. The first year really sets the foundation for understanding public policy, public administration. I like to describe the Evans School MPA program as a nice balance between an MPA and an MPP. MPA, Masters in Public Administration, MPP, Masters of Public Policy. To my knowledge, the Evans School is the only top 10 ranked program with a combined curriculum such as this. During your first year in the program, there are several sequence courses to help you develop the knowledge and skills necessary for a successful career in public policy and public administration. For example, PUB-POL, which we like to call PUB-POL, PUB-POL 511 and 512 is a 2-course sequence of management scheduled for autumn and winter quarter. 511, Managing Politics and the Policy Process, really looks at the broader web of systems and stakeholders. So we're looking outward facing, while 512, Managing Organizational Performance, really looks at the health of the organization. So looking from within, how do we manage people, processes, and performance? The second sequence classes are 516 and 517 and those are our microeconomics courses. So 516, Economics of Policy Analysis and Management 1, and 517, Economics of Policy Analysis and Management, really look at human behavior, understanding human behavior through data and statistical analysis. The third sequence classes are PubPol 527 and 528, which is your qualitative analysis 1 and 2 classes taken respectively into winter and spring quarter. We always like to call your second year your fun year, because this is where you have an opportunity to really customize your curriculum based on your career goals. You can select from 8 specializations: environmental policy, public finance and budgeting, international development, social policy, metropolitan and urban policy, public policy, nonprofit management and social innovation, public leadership. Some of our students decided they would like to take a specialization. You are welcome to take a specialization and choose the courses under that focus. And some of our students like to pick and choose their classes. So some may say, I want a little bit of environmental policy and I want a little bit of social policy. The important part is that you satisfy that bucket of electives, which is 28 credits. The capstone project is facilitated by a faculty member as lead, but you will be a consultant working with a real life organization. So that is something to look forward to. Our students really look forward to it year over year, just being able to take that knowledge that happens in the classroom and apply it to a real life organization. So just to recap, the Evans MPA program requires 72 credits total for degree completion. That is broken into 36 credits of core, 28 credits of electives, 8 credits toward the capstone, and a 400 hours of approved internship, which is typically done between the first year and the second year, but can be waived for significant work experience, prior work experience. So this is the portion where I turn it over to my colleague, Scott Allard. So I'm going to stop sharing. And then I'm going to add my panelists.
This is great, Jackie. While you're doing that, feel free to put questions you have in the chat. One thing, a couple things to note to build off of Jackie's presentation. There is the opportunity to have a program option or concentration in social policy, and a good number of students do that every year. But most students take probably at least one social policy elective while they're at Evans. And that's because most people's career paths in one way or another touch some aspect of social policy. So it's an area that's relevant to a lot of our students. When I teach my poverty and inequality class every year, usually have 45 to 50 students, and many of them may not be concentrators, but go on to do work that's adjacent to that topic area. And I think another important thing, Jackie mentioned the capstones. The capstone projects are a team-based way for you to get kind of another opportunity to deploy your tools and skills in a real-world context. And many of those have social policy focuses as well. And so there's lots of different ways to get that content through the curriculum. How are we doing, Jackie? Is it time for me to turn on my video?
Yes, time for you. There you go.
From
Thank
New
you.
York
I
City.
thought it was me. I was waiting for the button.
I'm Scott Allard, Professor Scott Allard. I am the Associate Dean for Research and the Daniel J. Evans, Endowed Professor of Social Policy. I've been at the Evans School for, this is my 9th year. But if I'm really honest, I tried to get a job at the Evans School ever since I finished my PhD. It was a place I really wanted to be at and come to. Most of my work focuses on issues of poverty and inequality in the US. And it's important for you to understand kind of a little bit of how I think about that work. I grew up in a household that would have qualified for public assistance programs had they existed in the 70s the way they do today. And I used to think that certified me to teach that content, to do research in that area. And I think over my professional career, I've realized that being a white cisgender male in society gives you a lot of privileges. And even though my family might have had hardships, the privileges and benefits of being a white male are really profound. And I understand them at times, and I just only can be aware that they exist and not maybe fully grasp what they've meant. That matters because it affects how I teach. It affects the voices I bring into class. It affects the work I do. It affects how I mentor. And I take those privileges and responsibilities really seriously, not just in my research, but also in my teaching. And tonight, well, we have several students here who I think I've had in class in one way or another, but whose work in my classes helped me be better at what I do. That's one of the reasons they're here, is they really helped me co-create what I do, and they did that in other parts of the school as well. So what I'd like to do is introduce. I'll invite our alums and our current student AJ to introduce themselves, just say a little bit about you, and then AJ, I'm going to throw the first question to you. So just as a heads up, you'll do the last introduction, but you'll get the first question. So Priya, why don't you, if you can turn on your camera, if you choose to, introduce yourself.
Sure. I apologize. I'm having trouble with my video, but
well, your photo's amazing. So
thank you.
It's a great photo.
Taken at the Tacoma, Washington Wright Park Conservatory for my Tacoma friends out here. And I'm exactly. I'm really excited to be with you all. Thank you so much for having me. Oh, AJ's got her camera on. I'll keep trying. Oh, here I am. Beautiful. Hi, everyone. So I'll just briefly introduce myself. Hi, everybody. I'm Priya. I use they, them pronouns, based in Tacoma, Washington, traditional homelands of the Puyallup tribe. Well, my experience with social policy started actually after college, when I worked at Urban Institute for about several years doing social policy analysis, but also program evaluation. And then I spent 2 wonderful years at Evans, really refining those skills and developing more expertise in things like decision-making and organizational structure, which also has policies involved in them as well. After Evans, I worked at the city of Seattle, and now I run a small consulting shop, and in that work, focus on policy analysis, evaluation, facilitation, and strategy work. So yeah, that's a little bit about me.
That's great. Great. Congratulations on all your success. Marco.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for the invitation to participate on this panel as an alumni. To Professor Aller and to Jackie as well. I really appreciate it. Good evening, everyone. My name is Marco Dorado, and I am a 2020 graduate of the Evans School. Very interesting time to have been at the Evans School during the pandemic and adapting to what came with that. But before I started at the Evans School, I'm actually originally from Denver, Colorado, and I worked in Denver in leadership development, advocacy, and policy work at the Latino Leadership Institute, and also as part of the Urban Leaders Fellowship. And so coming into the Evans School, I knew that I wanted to sharpen my policy skills, but what really attracted me to the Evans School was the fact that the curriculum was MPA. So Jackie talked about it a little bit, but it really was, I think, the ideal blend of administration and public policy, right? You didn't get one extreme or the other. You got, I think, a great balance of both. And so when I was at the Evans School, I started working at the National Development Council. Upon graduation, I continued to work at the National Development Council, but now I work at the National Democratic Redistricting Committee, focused on advocacy around redistricting reform efforts.
That is some of the most important work. Thank you for that. That's great. Elizabeth.
Hi, everyone. I'm sure everyone feels like their own path is like very twisty and windy in retrospect, but I graduated from undergrad with a dual degree in political science and Arabic. So I actually spent the first few years after undergrad living in Lebanon and living in Morocco, living in Washington, D.C., and I was doing some journalism and teaching. And then pivoted really hard in my mid-20s. I came back to Seattle, which is where I'm from, and worked in tech for a few years. And that's kind of when I started to realize that I really enjoyed the management side of the work, but wanted to kind of apply those skills to a space that created more public good, work for more kind of social justice, social policy type organizations. So I graduated Evans just in June, so very recently, and I got a job over the summer. I now work with an organization called Housing Connector, which is a local housing nonprofit that works in Seattle, and I'm a community partnership manager there. So directly doing that, which Evans kind of set me up to do, and I'm excited to talk about that more. But I'm from Seattle. I have a windy path, and I had, I think, 5+ years of experience before returning to grad school. So happy to answer any questions about those.
Yeah, that showed through in our classroom experience. It was obvious that you had a lot of real world experience. AJ.
Hi, everyone. My name is AJ. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm a current student and Dean's Fellow. It's my first year at the Evans School, and I'm hoping to specialize in social policy next year. I am actually currently studying in Parrington Hall, so that's really fun. I live in Seattle now, and I moved here all the way from Columbus, Ohio, and everybody makes fun of me for it in my cohort, being from Ohio, but it was great. I went to the Ohio State University for undergrad. I graduated in 2020. So I had a very similar undergraduate versus, also graduating in COVID. It was difficult. But for the last 2 years, I worked at the university as an assistant in the College of Public Affairs. So that was the degree that I graduated it with. And now I'm going to grad school for the same specialization. But I'm also hoping to kind of focus more in on what I'm really interested in policy. So, and also as a Dean's Fellow, I work with Dr. Allard a lot. Right now, we're working on a few different policy projects with the Evans Policy Innovation Collaborative. So I'm happy to talk about that as well. And
Well,
Scott, I'm happy to take your first question.
Oh yeah. So the first question, you and I sat down, had a cup of coffee when you were looking for housing after you made the decision, but we Zoomed while you were a prospective student, and we talked a bit about your options. I would love for you to share kind of what you had other good options. What led you to come to Evans, and why was Evans kind of the place that really spoke to you?
I'm very happy to talk about this because it was a hard decision. I could have stayed in Columbus, Ohio, could have done my graduate school at Ohio State. I was also looking at a lot of different programs. The reason why I came here, one, I was looking for an actively anti-racist institution, and I feel like Evans embodies that very well. I also wanted courses that aligned specifically with my policy interests. And I looked at a lot of different programs across, the country. I was looking to move out of Ohio. I was looking to have a new experience. And, my interests are housing policy and social policy implementation. And I really didn't find another program that had a lot of the courses that are provided at Evans. And so for me, it was kind of a no-brainer. I found this college very early on in my process of looking for grad schools, and I zeroed in and I worked really hard to get in because I was very certain that I would be able to find the classes and the faculty and the research opportunities that I needed here. So the courses offered here are very unique, especially in the social policy field. Like I said, I compared many other programs and I didn't find another one that better suited my interests. So I'm really happy to be here now. I worked really, really hard to get into this school. And if you're interested in social policy, speaking to the attendees now, you should definitely consider the Evans School. I'm very excited.
100%. That's great. We are so lucky to have you leading. AJ, I think when we'll kick into learning a little bit more about your Dean's Fellow position, because I think it's a pretty exciting new development and one that I think kind of highlights how we're continuing to evolve our curriculum and our opportunities for students. You should know there's a Columbus fan or fellow Columbus resident, Parker, in the house tonight. So you got a little shout out in the chat from that.
That's amazing.
There's
Welcome.
questions in the Q&A, and we'll hit those in a little bit. But I wanted to open it up. Maybe start with Priya. When you kind of reflect on your time at Evans and the classes you took, and I know you took a broad array of classes, some in social policy and not many outside. How did that help you prepare for the work you're doing, particularly as someone who fairly soon, started their own consulting firm? I'd love for you to share kind of what the curriculum and experience there meant to your path right when you finished.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to chat about that. So like I mentioned in my introduction, I was doing a little bit of social policy analysis and evaluation before I even went to Evans. And I loved doing that work, but it felt, to be honest, very much like I was building the plane as I was flying it, or like a little bit of flying by the seat of my pants. And while I was good at it, I didn't feel like I could be very intentional about the work. And it felt like I didn't have the skills to lead the work or really figure out how I wanted to apply it on my own. And so the Evans School curriculum helped me not only refine my social policy skills, thinking about really developing savvy and equitable methodologies for studying policies and seeing how people do their work, but also the leadership and decision-making classes helped me learn how to lead those research studies in a way that was equitable, fair, inclusive, and just frankly, overall better. Like you get better results when you can manage a team in this work as well. And so I think what you get at Evans is this really unique opportunity to not only like really refine your skills, but also develop the skills that are needed to be like a really holistic public servant. Yeah. And when it comes to doing that in my consulting work, I find that, if there's a different hat that I need to wear for a client, or, someone needs a different type of framework for their work, I can really easily find that. And I can really easily guide them on the way to do their work. And that's been invaluable to me.
That's great. I appreciate that. Marco, I would love for you to kind of reflect on the same question. You've had, you had also a kind of a unique path at Evans. I'd love for, just tell us a little bit about what the training and education meant there, and how you've seen it resonate in your work, particularly now that you're doing redistricting work, which is really critical.
Yeah, so looking at the list of courses that you have to take your first year, and then obviously versus your second year, was a little bit of a flashback and a blast from the past. I think back about my first year at Evans, and one of the most, I think, beneficial classes that I was able to take at Evans was in my first year was that management class of processes and organizations, because I very vividly remember having Joaquin Herranz as my professor in that class. And I actually feel like that is the one class that made me a very, very strong project manager. And I think that foundation that the first year core created for me was something that actually set me up for success, not only in the second year, but then for my professional trajectory thereafter. And so having this sort of administrative foundation, and then going into the second year where we took all of our electives, where I took your class, Professor Allard, where I took other social policy classes, including a housing policy class. That was really helpful because that then made us think about different policies. It made us think about the different stakeholders. And then it also made us think about solutions that, in a way that actually challenged us to really consider what policy solutions we could come up with. Because at the end of the day, and this is one of the main lessons I took away from this that I still use to this day in my current role, is that there's actually no right answer that is going to achieve all of your goals, right? And there are trade-offs that you have to consider in making those decisions, in creating those policies. And then also stakeholder engagement is not as easy as saying, I'm going to bring people together and ask them how they feel about this. I think the first time I heard that was in one of the social policy classes at the Evans School. And that is probably something that I encounter on a day-to-day basis in my job, because of the fact that policy is not that upfront, that black and white, right? There's nuance in policy. And so a lot of our social policy classes, I think, force us to sit in that nuance, in that uncertainty. And so now in my role as reform director at the National Democratic Redistricting Committee, I'm really able to take all of those skills, the project management skills, the people management skills, and also the understanding of policy as being sort of this nuanced idea, this nuanced subject, and then incorporate that into all the stakeholder engagement work that I have to do to advance our goals, that I think I would not have gotten that type of an experience or an education had I gone elsewhere. And I think this comes back to this idea, right, of this balancing act that is offered through the curriculum of that foundation of administration, with then being able to go into things like social policy, environmental policy, or whatever focus area folks decide to go into.
Yeah, I appreciate that. One of the things that when I listened to you and Priya talk about your experiences at Evans, one of the things that I think is evolved even since you were there, and Liz may have had a sense of this because she's a more recent graduate. We've really worked hard not just to talk about anti-racism, but to really bring an equity lens into the teaching and the curricular work. And I think when we teach program evaluation, there's a much more concerted effort to think about whose voices are often missing in research, or to think about how research design decisions are embedded with power and power relationships and dynamics. And so we are building this more intentionally into the curriculum, and not just in social policy classes, not just in program, but also in our econ and in our budgeting classes, where historically those aren't, equity and inclusion aren't really parts of those classes historically, traditionally. We're trying to do that work. There's a question in the Q&A. Someone asked, how often do you take courses outside the public policy school as a way to build on your specialization? And Jackie, correct me if I'm wrong, students can take 2 or 3 classes and it counts towards their degree? Is it 2 or 3? I forget.
Thank you. I was just typing the answer in, so I can just say it. The Evans School allows students to take up to 12 credits outside of the Evans School and bring them back towards your 72 credits for degree completion.
So that's three courses generally. I encourage students to take a look at courses outside the school and to even have fun with it. Like to take a class that's kind of a little bit of a flyer. I think sometimes that's hard to do, but it's great. I think it's great advice, at least. Did any of you I know, AJ, you're still in your first quarter, so I know you're in the middle of the fun part of the fun part of the core. But Elizabeth, Priya, Marco, did you take any classes outside of Evans?
I did, actually, in my first year. And I think this was advice from you, Scott. I took a class at the School of Social Work on anti-racist organizing.
Cool.
And it was a Saturday morning class that met once a month for like 6 hours. It was kind of like almost retreat style. And it was fascinating, not only just in like the content of the course, but also in meeting people at the social work program. And you'll notice after your MPA program, after your time at Evans, you will come across a lot of people who got social work degrees, and being able to spend time with them in class, see how they think and how they talk about the work they do was so helpful for me in the work that I do now, because I realize I'm working with a lot of those folks in my day-to-day. And it was just fun. It was fun to go across the street from Evans and be like, oh, I'm in a different space now, and get to know the campus better. So I would definitely recommend it to folks who have that opportunity.
That's great. Anybody else take classes outside?
Yeah, similar here. My second year, I think it was my last quarter, I took an urban planning class at the College of Urban Planning. I think it was like an urban economics class. And I took it because at the same time, I was also taking a housing policy class. And so I was really interested in sort of how these two sort of areas that very much interact with each other, learning a little bit more, right, as I'm learning about housing policy, but also about urban planning and urban economics, the ways in which they interact, and sort of what could come from that. And so very similar. I think that was a really great experience to get outside of the Evans bubble, expand a little bit of obviously the people that I see, the people that I engage with, but also learn a little bit more outside of this discipline.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Yeah, I think a lot of our students take classes in the college built environment where there's often classes on land use and zoning and planning and housing. Many students take classes in social work. Some of our students will take classes in the business school or in the law school, and then maybe in sociology or other places too. There's a lot of opportunities. I'm hopeful. I think one of the things that's been a hindrance to students doing this has been some of the rules on campus that, have kept people from taking classes in other units because of budget reasons. And I think these walls are starting to come down. There's tons of options now. And I think in the next year or two, there'll be even more options kind of coming on as we kind of shift from a scarcity mindset, if you will. Liz, you worked, as you said, you worked quite a bit before coming to Evans. And AJ, I'm going to throw a question similar to this to you too, that was in the chat. Given that you'd worked so much, what skills did you develop at Evans that were really valuable? And how did the training help you kind of hone or polish kind of an existing skill set that you had?
Yeah, I would definitely say it was more of the second, like a lot of polishing existing skill sets. And part of that was just, I came in thinking I would like management, and I was right, and I stayed on the management track. I dipped my toes into data and coding 3 or 4 times, and it just never stuck in a way that brought me joy. And so I have I still do a lot of data systems kind of like collaborative work at my organization, but I have not developed strong data skills, and that was a choice. I definitely think I wrote down the management skills, which really do have to do with like going back to the idea of managing stakeholders and what does it mean to even manage people? Like what does that mean when you don't actually, they don't necessarily work for you? You want to start building these like equitable systems. You want to build meaningful engagement. I think Evans did a great job of thinking about how we work together and how we work with other people. Budgeting skills, finance skills, reading, budgeting, and financial reports and statements. I had a mentor early in my life, a woman mentor, say, never let someone tell you no because of money. Understand money well enough to fight back if the no is because of money. And so I really learned a lot about that at Evans. And I think Evans just kind of brought me back to this like courage to really take ownership and initiative over things, right? We did a lot of like casework where you would get a 4 or 5 page case, and it's your job to come up with the recommendation. And we know it's abstracted and fictionalized, and that's okay. But I find every day in my current job, I'm able to like kind of insert myself and take initiative in a way that just, I have a lot more courage taking initiative and owning projects that I maybe don't have all the pieces, but I know how to get all the pieces.
Yeah, that's great. I appreciate you sharing that. AJ, one of the things, so this is in the Q&A, a question about your prior experience. I would love for you to share a little bit about this Dean's Fellows position. It's a new position that we've created this year, but will be, will continue forward. And talk a little bit about how your professional experience prior to coming to Evans has, maybe helped with the transition to graduate school, but also how it's helped inform the way you're doing your work as a Dean's Fellow, and maybe how you're approaching classes.
Absolutely. And Parker, I'm happy to answer your question, and Scott, yours as well. But I really thought coming into Evans, so I have 2 years of work experience before this. I was an assistant to the deans at the college that I graduated from. And I really thought coming into school, I was going to be like very small fish in a very big pond. But that's not the case at all. I'm 24. A lot of my fellow members of my cohort are about the same age with very similar experience. Some are older, some are younger and just out of college. But I really don't think that the amount of experience that you have before, it doesn't help or hinder your experience in graduate school. I don't feel like I am any less or better than my fellow cohort members. I learn a lot from them, and we all get along really well and have like a very good cohort mentality. Scott, about your question, I'd love to talk about the Dean's Fellowship. This, like Scott said, this is a new program, and I like Jackie, I remember when Jackie called me telling me that I received it, I think I started crying immediately. It was amazing. But this allows me to work with the dean and be placed in different projects that are involved, like that Evans hosts. So I mentioned earlier that I'm working currently with the Evans Policy Innovation Collaborative. That is abbreviated as EPIC. So I'm going to start calling it that instead of the long name. But I talked with Scott and I talked with the dean a lot before I came to school. And I really told them my interests and what I wanted to work on, and they placed me here. And I'm so happy that I'm working with EPIC. Right now I'm personally working on 2 different projects, one with Dr. Allard and one with Dean Sanford. So both of them sort of center around evaluating and improving policy implementation with these 2 separate projects. So first, we're working with the Washington Secretary of State to evaluate signature verification processes and ballot reviews. So when people send in their mail-in ballots, it can be rejected based on if your signature is incorrect or someone else signed your ballot for you, things like that. We're really working to reduce the rates of rejected mail-in ballots across the state. We're looking at discrepancies in ballot reviews, and we're trying to see if there's any inequities across, these different in each county or in these processes. So along with this, just as an aside, I visited 2 elections offices in Whatcom and Pierce counties and spoke with election officials and observed their verification processes. And I've really learned a lot so far. And it's been quite a fun project to work on. The second project that I'm working on is paid family and medical leave, where this is with Dean Sanford, and we're sort of at the start of this process, but we're evaluating implementation of the paid family and medical leave policy across the state, also looking for inequities in that process and ensuring equitable access to state benefits. So I think the last part of your question, Dr. Allard, was does it connect to my previous experience? And I'll say I worked a lot in undergrad on these issues. My job doesn't connect as much, but I was also like part of a higher education institution. So I know a lot about how grad programs are structured. So that really helps. But I think I'm happy to be working on these issues now. And it really connects to a lot of things I was interested in undergrad. So.
That's great. Thank you. We EPIC is a really great development in the school, and it's a way for us to do work in community in not a kind of a top-down ivory tower kind of model that research typically has. We really work with communities and with stakeholders to think about the questions that are relevant, the kind of policy or program redesigns that are relevant, and we try to bring different interests and groups together to kind of solve problems. So with PFML, there'll be a lot of different stakeholders at the table. If our ballots project goes as we hope, we'll bring together a group of voters, county officials, community, representatives of community organizations, and some experts on ballot materials. And we're going to help propose at least some changes based on our research findings to the envelopes and the voter education materials that we would then kind of share with the state. So, again, not us telling the state what's right, but actually working with people to get their feedback and their input and their ideas and help kind of elevate that. There's a question, Jackie, about concurrent degrees in the chat. I don't know if you want to say anything about that. You could think about that for a second. But there was another question about second-year projects, which I interpreted to be capstones. And so I know, AJ, you and I have never done a capstone because I'm a faculty member. I haven't done capstone at Evans. I've done them in other places. At the Maxwell School, I did capstones at Brown University, and I did capstones at University of Chicago. But I would invite any of our distinguished alums to talk about their capstone and what was great about it and how it helped them think about the work they wanted to do. Anybody want to go first?
Marco, would you like to go first?
Marco, we're looking at you, Marco. We're looking at you.
Sure, I would love to go first. Also, my capstone experience, we did our capstone. We started it in the fall of 2019, and then COVID happened. So that just threw a complete wrench in our how we were driving, how we're going, but we completed it. So my capstone project was working with the Department of Housing and Urban Development as they were working on creating a strategic plan to engage communities across the state of Washington in the use of the Opportunity Zone tax incentive. And so the way that I got interested in this is that I had actually done an assignment for my program evaluation class with Heather Hill on the Opportunity Zone tax incentive, a federal tax incentive that was passed a few years ago. And so having done that, and then my work with the National Development Council, I had already sort of had some FaceTime with the Department of Housing and Urban Development. And so when the opportunity came up of doing this capstone project with HUD, it was a very sort of natural, sort of organic project to take on and to be a part of. And what I really learned from this project, I think really comes back to this idea of how do you manage stakeholders? Because one of the very first problems that we came up with, that we encountered as we started working on our capstone project, was initially HUD really wanted to focus on supporting tribal communities in their use of this tax incentive. Well, it very quickly became evident that tribal communities necessarily didn't potentially want HUD's help, or did not agree with the way that HUD was going about trying to engage them. And so that was, I think, the first and probably one of the most important lessons about working with this government agency, right? That had all the best of intentions, but actually didn't go about working with community in the way that community wanted to be worked with or supported or engaged on this project. And so that, I think, really set the stage and frame for how my team thought about our project, but then also how we went about our interview process, our strategic plan development process, and ultimately the recommendations that we developed for HUD as they go about the process of engaging communities across the state in using opportunity zones. COVID did throw a big wrench in ultimately what our project looked like, because by the end of our project, COVID response had taken sort of the priority over anything else. And so it also was a lesson in how do we adjust given this thing that is completely out of our control and has upended the lives of everybody, obviously involved in this project, but across the state of Washington and across the world.
That's great. Thanks for sharing that. It sounds like you kind of, it put the O in capstone right then, right? It was kind of a little bit of a tricky one, right? A bad joke. Those are free though. You get those in my social policy classes. We don't charge extra for that. It's just part of it's in kind.
Yeah, Scott. I was like, this is so on brand right now.
It really is. I feel like I'm back in 511.
Right. Totally. On brand, exactly. Liz or Pia, would you like to just share a little bit about your capstone projects to give a sense of kind of the depth and scope that people that these projects entail?
Sure. Yeah, I can share for a little bit. And for context, Marco, it sounds like your end of program was a little chaotic. The beginning of my program was a little chaotic because I joined in 2016, which was when Trump was elected. And it was a really challenging and fascinating time to be at a public administration program. My capstone was with the Medina Foundation, which is a foundation local to Washington. And our task was to help them figure out how to make better decisions for grant making, specifically for their housing efforts. And so while philanthropy was the space of the work, it really was a project focused on decision making and coming up with the metrics and standards for that process. So what we did, we had I can't believe I still remember this so clearly. It was 4 years ago. But we had a 3-pronged approach. We did a really deep dive into census data to look at what homelessness rates were in different counties across Washington. We then did a administrative data review looking at what the past grantees have been working on and what it seemed like their efforts, focusing on the trend of their work to see what they were shifting to. And then we ground truthed that with a survey that we sent to the past grantees to figure out who their priority populations were for serving and what they saw as those emerging needs were. We used all of that information to create, and I did not do this in Excel, it was one of my partners who was the savvy Excel person, create this matrix tool where you could grade the different grant applications based on who they were serving, what their programs were doing. Were they direct rent deposits? Was it transitional shelters? Was it permanent supportive housing? and plug that in and decide on your granting based on those factors. And it was really wonderful to work in a team. It felt really real life. And it was a really interesting process to manage the client expectations and work with not only foundation staff, but with their board of directors. And I really enjoyed it. The time I did it was the first year they were doing the consulting process. And I think it's been really invaluable for the different years following.
That's cool. I like that you remember the three-prong approach.
Oh, me too.
Hopefully it was a positive.
It was. Yeah, it actually went really well. I loved my team. I loved my professor, and it was a good experience.
And, one of the neat things about capstones is, the projects can be, they evolve in ways that you don't understand always. And that happens in moments of crisis, but also in moments of, that are perhaps, quote unquote normal. But a lot of times students will reach out to faculty for help or tips or guidance or feedback on stuff. They work with their capstone advisor. So one of the cool things is you do get to engage students around methodological decisions or design decisions, or help provide substantive input on a survey or an interview instrument, or interpreting a finding. So there is interaction between faculty, even if you're not kind of holding a capstone as an advisor. Liz, do you want to share just real quick what your capstone was?
Yeah, I'll just share the title. So I was helping a Vietnamese American mutual aid group help resettle Afghan refugees after the fall of Kabul in August of that year. And we were trying to help a mutual aid organization figure out how to avoid some typical issues of resource scarcity, burnout, communication, conflict, and it was really unique. Even amongst capstone projects, I think it was kind of like a little different. It was great. I also my last sentence is, I've done a ton of client-based work. And so I wouldn't say that the capstone was revolutionary for me, but it matched my real world experience of client-based work, which I think is worth commending the capstone process.
Yeah. That's actually a really great point. Because for a lot of people with experience, those projects may not be a different process, but it's good to know that they're not make work or kind of, things that feel trivial, or not, things that the clients won't use.
Yeah, it's real work. It's real stuff. It's good. Yeah.
There's a question in the Q&A, which I would love to open it up to all you. And then, Jackie, I don't know if there's also a question in the chat about tips for admissions. That seems like that's a Dr. Miller question. Tips on admissions and applications. You can engage our distinguished panel on that as well. But Elizabeth in the Q&A asked, how do you keep in touch with the populations that you serve so you don't end up in a policy ivory tower, which is it's something I grapple with all the time. But I would really love to hear how you all think about this in the work you're doing and in the context of Evans. Like class, I can call on you. I know your names.
I'm happy to share a little bit. I think in my case, it's a little bit easier to engage with the communities that I serve, because the work that I do is half advocacy, half policy, right? And so part of the advocacy work is ensuring that I am crossing my T's and dotting my I's as it relates to engaging the communities that are going to be critical toward advancing some of the advocacy goals that we look toward advancing. But I think that being said, right, and coming back to this point, that stakeholder engagement is a lot easier said than done. And it actually requires substantial investment of time, at times resources as well. And I think a genuine desire to end up with a mutually beneficial outcome. And so for me, I think it is obviously a little bit easier because of that advocacy work. But I think ensuring that I am then taking what I'm learning from the advocacy work into the policy conversations that I'm having as well, I think is really important to not sort of end up in this place where it's either an ivory tower or an echo chamber that's actually devoid of any of the input or ideas or views that the community we're working with wants to see as part of the policy.
That's great.
I want to really quick and just say, so I don't work in government. I work at a nonprofit, but I think that actually some government departments and certainly nonprofits, it's really about making sure that you're empowering all members of staff and all like members of your department, right? Like a lot of people, you'll learn a term that you'll learn to love at the Evans School called street level bureaucrat. And it's like these folks who are like the frontline people implementing policy, enacting policy, thinking about the trade-offs that they have to make, right? Like it's the bus driver that like somehow has to not let a kid on a bus because they don't have their ORCA card, right? Like, and so I think at the nonprofit I work at, we talk a lot about how do we empower the actual case managers we work with to give feedback, to make them like parts of the decisions that we make, all the way up and down the organization. So I'd add that in there too from a public sector, but not government perspective.
Yeah. Well, it's a good reminder that nonprofit organizations, and particularly big ones, can operate much like a government bureaucracy and make policy, whether it, in a formal way or in a less formal implied kind of way. So, thinking about this question in the context of nonprofits is really critical. Priya, I want to throw this to you because you do consulting, and I imagine this is a question that probably really drives the core principles and values of the work you do, right?
It does. And as a consultant, my work is very much project-based. So for a lot of it, I have to, for example, I worked on the City of Redmond Human Services strategic plan that's guiding their work for the next 5 years. And I before that had never been to Redmond, did not know much about it. And it was also in the pandemic. So we weren't really, most of our work was virtual. So how were we going to build relationships with the people who were using human services or who needed human services but didn't want or know how to access them? And so it was this odd tension of needing to build relationships really quickly, build trust and show that trust, and also just like get the work done because you were on a 10-month contract, like, and you can't really delay it because it has to go to council soon. And so you really need to, like, exactly like Elizabeth said, connect with and build trusting relationships with those street level bureaucrats, with the folks who are visiting every single nonprofit organization to share what work is happening and ask for help. And I've really also found value in flattening the way that I do my research. So it's not so much that like I and my partners are the ones guiding every single thing, but we make space in our project budget for involving community-based organizations and paying them for that work, or paying their volunteers or their service users for the work. So I think it's not just in maintaining these relationships, but also in how you build your research. I just want to add one quick thing as well. If you're someone who is doing, really detailed policy research, I think it's also really important to make sure that you're using your time to volunteer for the services that you're researching. So for example, if you are really deeply into food access, you need to make sure that you're going to a food pantry at least 3 times a month, if I'm being honest. If you're really into housing research, you need to make sure that you're connecting with your local housing service providers to know what is happening and to see directly what is happening. Because there's just nothing better than that.
Yeah, I share that. I think, one of the things I try to do in my own work is whenever I'm starting a new project, I try to be connected in that way, whether it's volunteering, serving on boards, spending time in communities. And I think that that's true as a researcher, and certainly true as we find our paths as public servants. AJ, I would be interested in your thoughts on this question as it relates to some of the PFML work and how we're trying to kind of structure that project so that we're not kind of recreating the kind of traditional ivory tower evaluation work.
Absolutely. Well, actually, I was going to talk about this with ballots too, because we get to work with election officials as well. But specifically related to the paid family and medical leave, we are doing, and I just started working on this project, so I apologize if I have limited knowledge, but we are working on putting together a national convening of people who are experts in this field. And we're hoping to reach out and have interviews with people who have applied for these benefits and, not received them or had missed their weekly claims or things like that. We really value the direct interactions with the program that we're trying to implement and improve. But specifically about ballots too. And Elizabeth, I thought it was so funny that you mentioned street level bureaucracy, because we just learned about that in 511. And I, was just about to bring it up in relation to my work, but working with county election offices, we spoke to county auditors, we spoke to people who were actually checking each ballot to see if the signature matched, and they know best. Like, I don't know about this. This is the first time I've worked with the elections process. Like, I'm here to collect this research and report back to my team, but they really have this information, and it's so important to speak with them and hear what they have to say. And I'm actually writing my memo for class about some of the things that they were telling me as well, and for 511. And so I think it's just it's really important to connect with the communities that know the best about their work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's well said. That's well said. Jackie, we're approaching the hour mark here. And I could ask another question to the group here, but we have a couple questions about admissions and things. One is about concurrent degrees. And I would just offer, we don't have very many students that pursue concurrent degrees. They do them, and often it's with social work or the law school. Those tend to be the most common. I think that it requires some planning and guidance, and working with some student services to make sure everything is timed out right, because it's you're juggling two different bureaucracies. I think whenever I think about concurrent degrees, I always ask students about whether they need the second degree, or the trailing degree, if you will. And I think sometimes you can do maybe like what Priya and Marco did and take classes in a school of social work and see if you like it, and then decide whether you want to kind of pursue a concurrent degree, or the opposite if you're kind of a social work first. I think that matters. And I say that I had another one of our MPA students, alums, who's in a PhD program now actually in social work, came to me with this question, and I gave her that advice. She went and took a social work class in her first quarter, and then was like, you know what, this isn't my jam in the way that I thought it would be for my master's degree. It's more practice and applied, and I want something that's more policy and research. And so she figured it out. Had it worked well, the concurrent degree would have made sense. So I think that's some of the encouragement I would give, just as kind of a general question. Jackie, I turn it over to you, Dr. Miller.
So I would say I just direct message you that you are welcome to schedule a time with me, email me, happy to walk you through concurrent degrees. We have several students doing concurrent degrees. As Dr. Allard said, most are in MSW, but we also have urban planning, we have law, we have data analytics in the foster schools. So there are a handful of students who are doing concurrent degrees, and I'm happy to walk you through that process. I want to remind you to the audience prospective students that our application deadline is quickly approaching. It is January 15th, and I was just going to see if I can quick share the screen. It will be January 15th is the application deadline. If you are looking for the Evans Fellowships, that is a hard deadline for you. All applications must be in and completed to be considered for an Evans Fellowship. That's funding by January 15th. I have posted the application materials here. I had just did a webinar this morning on a general idea of the Evans School, the resources that it has to offer, and that's going to be posted to our YouTube channel, and you are welcome to take a look at that at your leisure. Thank you to my panel for taking the time to talk to prospective students about social policy. I really enjoyed hearing about your experiences, not only in the Evans School, but how you apply that degree and knowledge to your careers. And so, AJ, we talk daily in the hallways. So I'll continue to see you in the hallways and find out what you're up to. Thank you, everyone, for taking the time to speak with us. And this concludes our information session for today.
Thanks, Priya,
everyone.
Elizabeth,
Thanks,
AJ,
Scott.
Thank you,
Marco.
everyone.
Taylor,
Appreciate
thanks,
you so
Scott.
much.
Thank you,
Bye.
everyone.
Bye.